Hello, BookTube, it's Leah Cooper, and today I'm bringing you my last wrap-up of the year for December. So December was a really good reading month for me, especially compared to the rest of this year. I read 9 books. It was a total of 2,500 pages, which isn't a whole lot. They were quite a few short books, but it was still actually the highest number of pages I read in a single month this year. I also reached my Goodreads goal, which was, well, my amended Goodreads goal, which was to read 50 books. I finished the year with 52 books. I finished reading the last book of the year actually earlier today. I'm filming this on the evening of December 31st because I like to read right up to the wire of the calendar year. So the first thing I finished this year was Rogue Protocol by Martha Wells. This is the third book in the Murderbot novella series. I can't really talk about it because it's the third book, but it is the ongoing adventures of a sentient robot, basically, in space. This series is fantastic. I've given every single one of these novellas 5 stars. This one was no different. I'm on the wait list for the 4th. I can't wait for it. Martha Wells blows me away with how she can create such engaging characters in such a short span of time. The next thing I read was Born by Jeff Vandermeer. I listened to this on audiobook. I quite liked it. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed the audiobook. I thought the gal who did the narration, whose name I can't remember now, she did a really awesome job too. This is another science fiction book taking place in what could be, I don't want to say a near dystopian future because I do feel like it's a couple, like, closest I would say is a couple generations away, but it is a dystopian city in a world that has been devastated first by cataclysmic climate change that led to a series of wars and stuff, factions, governments, countries splintering. The protagonist is an adult who we discover was a refugee, and kind of her parents moved her around quite a bit when she was a child, running away from these issues of climate change and the destabilization that has on the globe, which, again, it's a near future, like kind of scarily near, while still feeling like 50 years removed from us. Anyways, she's now living in an unnamed city. She doesn't precisely remember how she got there, though she does remember her childhood. She's a scavenger who has an alliance with a man who was previously employed by the company, which is a organization that has a base in the city, and we know that they created this technological monster called Mord, who has since gotten too strong and kind of gotten out of hand, and Mord now roams the city as sort of a malevolent, consuming god. The company itself has completely sealed itself off from the rest of the city, and the city is otherwise populated by 2 primary warring factions. The man who our protagonist, Rachel, is aligned with, and another former employee of the company, or I don't remember if she's an employee now or if she came to the city to find out about the company, named the Magician. Anyways, Rachel is a scavenger. One day she finds a thing, literally a thing. She doesn't know what it is, and she names it Born, and it has sentience, and she kind of raises it, and stuff happens. It's a convoluted kind of novel. It meanders around a little bit. It does so in a way that I found more interesting than another book I read this month. So I gave it 4 stars. It's a really strong 4.5 stars. Like, I'm thinking back on it, and it's something that I would definitely recommend to the right person. I think the way Jeff Vandermeer weaves in climate change is really interesting, and the effects it has. Early 21st century preoccupation with stuff like EMPs or computers failing and losing all of our data and stuff, and what that would do to the world. And increasingly, I feel as though we're facing not necessarily a Y2K bug problem, but we're facing what happens when so much of our world is destabilized by rising ocean waters and famines and droughts caused by a rapidly increasing globe and melting ice caps and the destruction of entire species and ecosystems and stuff like that. So I found this book really interesting. I loved Rachel as a character. She has a very difficult time. She has to make a lot of decisions. She discovers a lot of things about herself and about the man she's aligned with, whose name I can't remember. Something like Wex. It's not that though. And I can't think of what his name is. It's a good book. I really liked it. I think it deserves some of the hype it's getting. It's the first thing by Jeff Vandermeer I've ever read, and I'll definitely be continuing. I want to read Annihilation next. So the next thing I read was an arc, and that was The Winter of the Witch by Catherine Arden, this third book in, I guess it's called the Nevernight trilogy. No, the Winter Night trilogy. I never knew what the trilogy was called. I have a review of the second book for sure, because I read that as an arc last year. I'll link that somewhere up here. And I don't know if I actually have a full review of the first book. Might not. I think The Bear and the Nightingale is one of my favorite books from 2017, actually. And it's a great piece of historical fiction / fairy tale retelling about a girl named Vasilisa and her conflicts with the church and early Orthodox Catholicism in, like, I don't know, 12th century Russia. I actually don't know the exact dates, though this book is very heavily rooted in actual historical events, which is another reason that I love it. It's really great. It's really good. The third book is the conclusion, so I can't tell you a whole lot. It was a little bit of an emotional roller coaster. The beginning started off with something really terrible happening, and I was a little bit shocked, actually, with one of the directions the author took. I gave it 4 stars. Was it the best trilogy conclusion I've ever read? No. Was it the most emotionally satisfying trilogy conclusion I've ever read? No. Though one of the things I was hoping to happen did happen, but it, like, happened in a really strange way. So I'm kind of like, okay, about that. I still think The Bear and the Nightingale is the best and the strongest one. Though, I will say, for the most part, I think the pacing of the third book is slightly better than the pacing of the second book. But I thought the plot of the second book was more interesting than the plot of the third book. It was just kind of rushed. So, I don't know. I would still definitely suggest picking up The Bear and the Nightingale, at the very least. I'll have a full review of The Winter of the Witch. I need to sit down and compose my thoughts in a more coherent, write stuff down and really think about it. I'm going to have a full review of it. It's not coming out until the 8th of January, so expect a review closer to the publication date. The next thing I actually listened to, for the most part, was The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This is a science fiction novel about a starship crew that punches holes in space and creates... What are those things in Mass Effect called? Like, the space travel in this book reminded me heavily of like, Mass Effect. Anyway, they do that for a living, and the book's about them traveling to a place where they're supposed to do a job. That's it, really. Everyone seems to love this book. It is definitely a BookTube darling. I can understand, I guess, why people like it, but personally, I gave it a 3 stars. I listened to most of it on audiobook, which I'm glad I did, because I had to return my copy of the audiobook like 50 pages before the end, so I ran over to the library and picked up a physical copy of it and finished reading the last, like, 2 chapters. And I don't think I would have liked this book. I don't actually think I would have been able to get through this book if I had been reading it. The fact that I was listening to it on audiobook and I was listening to it while I was doing a ton of Christmas baking is probably one of the reasons I was able to get through it as quickly as I did. It still took me like 2 or 3 weeks because it's a pretty hefty book. It's like 450 pages, I want to say. So this book's real slow. And not a lot happens. And it's not... is it space opera? I don't think so, because I don't think enough happens. Like, there's one action thing that happens in this whole book, and it happens very close to the end, and it's just 1 chapter. That's it, which is fine. In that regard, I think it is definitely supposed to be more of like a character study, and again, that's fine. My problems with it, and I wrote a pretty lengthy review of this on Goodreads, but okay. My problem with it is that one of the main characters is a manic pixie dream, Kaylee, and I am trying to allude that it is 100% a copy and paste of Kaylee from Firefly, which is fine. Kizzy She even has a name that's kind of like Kaylee and Kizzy. Kizzy is the manic pixie dream version of Kaylee, and that just drove me nuts. About half of the secondary characters that we encounter, all of them Kizzy's friends, have Kizzy's exact same personality, which I found really repetitive. Like, there's a lot of characters. Almost all of them have almost nearly identical personalities. The author voice in this made the characters all sound the same, because I was listening to this on audiobook, so I just have someone, like, the way the characters talk, they all sound the same. Like, the way they explain things, and oh my god, there was so much exposition in this book. And again, like, I get that it's a sci-fi book and the author has a lot of ideas, and the author's ideas are really interesting, but the problem is she relied almost exclusively on telling rather than showing. And she had this tick when she would have a secondary character or even a primary character explain to another primary character, because there is a primary character named Rosemary who hasn't really been off-world and hasn't encountered a whole lot of alien things, so a lot of stuff is new to her because she is the reader surrogate in this book. So whenever people are explaining things, they launch into a long expository not even tale, but it's kind of like, it sounds like a textbook. And they launch into that exposition in nearly identical speech patterns every single time. And this goes on for 400 pages. And it's just, it felt like reading fan fiction also. But fan fiction where I wasn't invested in anything. Because, like, so here's the thing. Fan fiction, there is a tendency in fanfic for it to be meandering and very light on plot, and people are really invested in just living with characters. And the reason that this, I think, is so popular is generally fandoms are created on canonical properties that are really chock full of, like, action and adventure and conflict. And so we don't get a whole lot of time in the canon to breathe with the characters. And that's why it's so seductive to have fan fiction that allows you to just exist with them. But that works because you're already invested in the characters and their conflicts. And they've already been through a lot. And so there is a lot of aftermath for them to breathe in the space afterwards. This book didn't have that because there really wasn't any conflict. The conflicts felt very, very low stakes. What conflicts? There's, like, really only one chapter, and it's not even very long, that has any conflict in it. There is this random side conflict that pops up, like, 3/4 of the way through the book, right before the actual chapter of conflict, that had no foreshadowing, doesn't go anywhere, and it's a real weird plot thread that I don't know if it just exists. It has to do with Corbin, the algae engineer. I don't know if it exists as kind of like a neutered thread of his character having more of an arc in the book that got cut for length, because he also is one of the least developed characters in the book. And that's going to lead me into another thing. The other big thing with the characters is not only are they very samey, but I hate being this asshole, but, like, dude, everyone in this book is too nice. Like, people can be nice, but, like, even when you love someone, you still have, like, arguments with them. You still, like, might disagree about things. People are just, like, way too nice. Like, I don't know. And I'm not some asshole who thinks that everyone has to be, like, a backstabbing traitor in space. Like, that's not what I'm here for. But you have to have some variety. You have to have some friction between people, even people who are friends or family or whatever. I feel like for it to be completely realistic, or, like, for me to completely buy into what you're selling, like, it just felt very fake. It felt like the whole book was too low stakes. Like, here's the thing. If you're not going to have interpersonal conflicts, then I think the characters themselves need to be encountering stuff. Like, there has to be some kind of conflict in your novel, and there just was not in this book until the very end, and it felt very rushed and thrown in or tacked on, and I won't be continuing. It's not for me. The next thing I read was Alana, the First Adventure by Tamora Pierce. This is the first book in the Song of the Lioness Quartet by Tamora Pierce, which I think is her first. Pretty sure this is, like, the original one, the original quartet by Tamora Pierce. She's a pretty famous guess, middle grade author at this point. I listened to this on audiobook. I gave it 3 stars, I guess. If I'd read this as a kid, I probably liked it, and then I would be reading it as an adult going, oh, why did you like this? The writing is incredibly simplistic. It reads like very young middle grade. It definitely read younger than I was expecting, which is fine, I guess, in this first book. And I do think maybe the first book is the best book, but it's also like the most simplistic. I don't know. Because I've now read the first 3, so we'll get to those. Actually, I'll go ahead and say I also listened to In the Hand of the Goddess and The Woman Who Rides Like a Man this month, though those were interspersed with other books. So I listened to all of those first 3 in the quartet. And the second one, I gave 3 stars. The third one, I gave 2 stars. The second one, the character, I want to say she's like 12 to 14 or 15 in the first book, and then she's like 15 to 18 in the second one. And then she's 18 in the third one. So the second one, it still reads like young middle grade. And actually, the third one maybe reads like young YA, except there's a whole lot of sex in 2 and 3. Like, Alana is getting some, which, like, is fine, but was shocking for a book that otherwise reads like it should be for 10-year-olds. I don't really know. Like, I think the books are supposed to age with the reader, but the problem is that other than the sex parts, the books don't age. Like, they're not actually more complex. The writing is not particularly, it's like, it's okay, but it's super basic. So I don't really know. I hate the love interests in the series a lot. I think Alana's fine. I think her adventures are fine. But man, I hate the love interests. I am going to listen to the 4th book, finish the quartet. I'll have some feelings about that, I'm sure. I hope it's better. I don't know. Like, I foresee some places where the 4th book could go, and it could be fine, or it could really piss me off. So we'll see. I definitely think my disgust with the love interests is more of an adult thing, because one of them, when I read the first book, he struck me as a young man, but still an adult in the first book when Alana meets him when she's like 12 or something. He's one of the first people who finds out she's a woman, because it's about a young girl who gets her twin brother to fake a letter of introduction to the court where her brother's supposed to go to train to be a knight, and her brother doesn't want to do that, so she goes instead pretending to be his twin brother instead of his twin sister, and she trains as a knight and hides her identity until she's 18. There's this adult character who discovers she's a woman when she starts bleeding and she doesn't know who else to go to, and she goes to him and his mother to help discover what's going on when she gets her period. And he's a love interest, but he's like, I feel like he's kind of been trying to get into her pants since she was 14, and he's an adult, and it creeps me out. Like, I don't like it. Yeah, those are some of my thoughts on the series. I'm being really critical of childhood classics. I have more issues with how it's, like, where do you market this book? Like, who is this book intended for? Like, this book series? Because, like, the first one I could give to a middle grade reader, but I couldn't give books 2 or 3 to a middle grade reader. I wouldn't want to. The next thing I read was The Complete Tales of Qetsiyah Gold by Kate Bernheimer. This has been on my TBR for about a year, maybe 2 years. And I decided to go ahead and pick it up from the library because it was short, and I really wanted to read just some, like, kind of fantasy-inspired stuff, or fairy tales-inspired stuff. This book was not entirely what I was expecting of it. I gave it 3 stars. I was really quite enjoying it. It's a actually contemporary story inspired by fairy tales, told in a series of vignettes about Qetsiyah Gold's life, taken from various different moments in her life and recounted out of order. All of those things are things that are like my catnip. I love a non-linear tale. I love vignettes that kind of culminate in the themes of the book. I was really liking this. I was probably going to give it a 4-star because I liked the writing style, and it was kind of this sort of odd, spare, slightly fantastical thing I really needed and wanted to read and haven't read in a while. But I really hated the last vignette in this story. It took a weird twist because, like, up until the last vignette, there's been kind of the central conflict between Qetsiyah and her struggles with her in her marriage and her cheating husband. And then the last vignette basically twists and completely absolves the husband and puts all the burden on Ketsia, and I really didn't like it. So I got a 3. The next thing I read was, and actually the last thing I'm going to talk about, because I already talked about The Woman Who Rides Like a Man, is Revenant Gun by Yoon Holly. This is the 3rd book in the Machineries of Empire series. I got this as an advanced reader's copy last year before it came out, and I did not get around to reading it. I want to say it came out in June of this past year. I feel really bad. I do have reviews of books 1 and 2, Nine Fox Gambit and Raven Stratagem, up on my channel. You can search for those if you're interested. I really love Nine Fox Gambit. It's probably one of my favorite science fiction novels. I thought Raven Stratagem was okay, and I was kind of, I'll see how Yoon Holly finishes up the trilogy. I gave this a 4 stars. I think it's a good book. Is it a perfectly satisfying conclusion to the trilogy? No. Do I have some issues with it? Yes. Will I do a full review of this? Yes. Because I feel really bad that I didn't do that when I got a copy of it, but it was during my reading slump and I just was not in a place where I could read this book. And to be fair, this book really didn't start picking up till about page 100. I can't talk about it too much. Spoilers. There will definitely be spoilers in my review, but I will say that my biggest problem with Raven Stratagem and this book is that the POV choices. So in Nine Fox Gambit, like, obviously the world is really interesting and the technology is really interesting, and those are definitely things that keep me reading in the series, but another thing that gripped me and pulled me in was the protagonist, Kel Cheris, and Jadeo. And Kel Cheris is almost the only protagonist in Nine Fox Gambit. It's been a while since I read Nine Fox Gambit, but it's almost completely from her perspective, with just a couple of interjections from a few random characters, and they are just small scenes, which was like fine. Like, okay, the author wants to give us a glimpse of an area that he literally cannot give us without taking us away from Cheris's point of view. Okay, fine. The second book is primarily from other people's perspectives. I think Cheris, now it's been like a year and a half since I read Raven Stratagem, so I can't quite remember how much POV we get. Like, I don't think Cheris is a POV character at all. She's there. She interacts a lot with one of the POV characters, but like, I don't think she's a POV character, or if it is, it's very minor. She does have a POV in this, but it's the smallest POV. There's basically 4 POVs in this, and Cheris is the smallest. And then there's one major POV from a basically new character who I didn't really like, and since that's the main POV we get, every time I got to one of their chapters, which were frequent, my first instinct was to put the book down. And then the other 2 POVs, I was like, whatever. They kind of made me want to just, like, stop reading too, but they weren't, I don't know, they weren't quite as frequent. But then there was, it's weird. It's oddly balanced, the way the POVs are not balanced, basically. Because, like, there's one POV that exists for, like, the first half, and then there's another POV that exists for the second half. Like, why? It's just such a strange structure, and I don't think it necessarily does the book any justice when, in my opinion, Kel Cheris and Jadeo, the voice in her head, from the first 2 books, are the strongest characters in this series, and the characters I'm most invested in. I will have more thoughts on this book in a full review. Like I said, I don't want to take up too much time, but that's just kind of like where I'm at with this. I would still suggest picking up Nine Fox Gambit, though, because just as a book, as a piece of science fiction, I think Nine Fox Gambit is amazing. I don't want to say you could read it as a standalone, but you could kind of read it as a standalone, and it might be stronger as a standalone, but I'll talk about that more in my review. Those are the things I read in December. That's how I finished up my reading year. It was kind of a mixed bag, but, like, I mostly enjoyed everything I read or listened to, even if I didn't, like, give it a bunch of stars. Like, even though I'm not rating the Tamara Pierce books very high, they make pretty good audiobooks, and they're interesting to listen to because of their place in, like, canonical middle grade fantasy. And actually, they've inspired me to go ahead and pick up a few more like classic middle grade series to listen to. So I've really been wanting to read the Susan Cooper books. I want to say the series is called like the Dark is Rising series, so that's also the name of one of the books. Whatever the series is called, I read Over Sanderstone when I was a kid and did really like it, but I never continued on with the series. So I think I'm going to pick some of those up on audio and listen to them. And yeah, anyways, let me know if you've read any of these things, and what you thought about them, if you loved them, if you hated them, if I've inspired you to pick anything up. I don't think I raved about anything, but I don't know. Anyways, thanks for watching. If you enjoy any of my reviews, or you like listening to me ramble about books, be sure and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any videos, and I'll see you guys in my next video. I don't know what it's going to be or when it is going to be, because I'm just filming a bunch of stuff, and who knows when anything gets posted. So yeah, thanks for watching. See ya.